I'll try not to stick my tongue out.
All right, you can feel free to do whatever you want. I'm wearing slouch. This is technically a pajama shirt, so it's all good.
Not your stubbies and thongs.
Yeah, all the same. All I need is a 4X gold next to me too, and then I'll be sweet. Well, everyone, welcome back to a very exciting episode of the Storybox podcast. Today, my friends, I'm delighted to welcome Professor Tim Spector, or Dr. Tim Spector, from wherever you guys know him of. If you're in Australia, you probably know him. But if you don't know him, he is an award-winning scientist and author with over 1,000 original articles published in some of the world's top scientific journals, placing him in the top 1% most cited scientists on the planet. He's got several books, some of which are absolutely blowing up at the moment. He's got a book called The Diet Myth, Spoon-Fed, and his most recent book, Food for Life, which you can go and get on Amazon. Food for Life is his most recent book, which is out right now. It's his most extensive yet, taking an in-depth look at all the latest scientific evidence on what we eat, how we eat it, and why. Very important questions before we put things in our mouth and digest it. So, Professor Tim Spector, can I welcome you so much to the Storybox podcast today?
G'day. Great pleasure to be here. But that's the limit of my Australian. I'll go back to my POM accent now.
You were just telling me a moment ago that your mum is Australian. You grew up a little bit here in Australia. How often do you get over here?
Well, it was usually about every 2 or 3 years, but I haven't been for about 4 or 5 now because of the pandemic, etc. So I am looking forward really to my next trip. So hopefully, be nice to do something at the end of this year. Be really cool. Do miss it.
What was it like for you growing up in good old Australia?
Well, my father was an academic professor, and he did a sabbatical in Monash in Victoria, yeah. And a couple of them actually. And so the whole family came out and spent, I think it was at least 6 months. And my brother and I went to the local school. It was Camberwell, which people in Melbourne know, the suburb of Camberwell, and went to the school. And it was a bit of a shock for us because, strangely, Australia at that time was really strict and the teachers were really strict. And my class was divided into Australians and New Australians. So the immigrants were on one side of the room and the Aussies on the other. And I was put in with the immigrants initially.
Oh, wow.
It was only when they found out I could play cricket that I was allowed to move to the Australian side. So this gives you an idea of what 1960s Australia was like. We had to go out and listen to God Save the Queen, or sing and salute the flag and march in. It was all very military, and we were, even at the age of sort of 7 or 8, there was corporal punishment as well. So the only good thing is there was lots of sports, and you could get unlimited licorice and meat pies from the tuck shop. So they were the good things about going to an Australian school. But it was a great experience. So very few kids of my age had travelled, and of course, getting to Australia then, you pretty much had to stop everywhere. Sort of all across the Pacific. You'd be stopping Fiji and Tahiti and Hawaii. It sort of took forever, whichever way you went. So it was a great experience. And so, yeah, and always been fond of Australia and any excuse to come back. So, yeah, so what was really interesting is my brother and I, within a few weeks, our accents had changed. We completely blended in because we didn't want to be on the immigrant side of the room. And I think kids are chameleons. And it was quite interesting. But then, used to go to school on the tram by ourselves, and certainly fond memories. And going to the beach and the swimming pool. Although my grandfather was a real fitness fanatic, and my mum had was brought up. She swam for Victoria, so he was always trying to get us up at 6 a.m. and get us swimming. But often it was a freezing cold swimming pool, and one of the real Olympic ones, and it slightly put you off with that sort of fanatical type of parenting. But really good memories.
Are you a fan of the cold plunges today, though?
I'm terrible. I think my genes are really the wrong ones, and I do really badly in the cold. I do swim in the sea, but mainly in Spain rather than in England, and so do long ocean swims. And I do get cold, but I'm generally wearing a light wetsuit, so I haven't found myself drawn to the cold plunges. Or I've tried 45 seconds in the shower, but I think you've got to do it every day, and I'm traveling around too much for that. So I've got lots of excuses, as you can tell. I'm a bit wimpy on that front.
I love cold weather or colder weather, but I don't like cold plunges. Let's just say that. I just prefer to be in a colder environment because my body temperature just rises, especially at nighttime. So for me, being in good old sunny coast, Queensland, heat, humidity is, especially at nighttime, not a good mix. So I'm always trying to cool myself down as best I can. So I would trade places with you in a heartbeat, Tim, with you being in Europe at the moment and me being in the warmer environments. But I did want
perhaps we'll swap. Perhaps we'll swap. That'd be a good idea. We could have a job swap.
We'll do a foreign exchange swap, But I did want to ask you about, so you grew up here for a little bit, then you moved over to Europe, obviously. You're there still now. You've got a lot of wisdom and knowledge when it comes down to diets. And how do you think the average Australian diet compares to, say, some of the other diets you've seen, like the American diet, the UK diet, and abroad?
I think Australian diet is pretty similar to the British diet, and which is nearly as bad as the American diet. So the American diet is beyond doubt the worst diet on the planet. And I rate bad diets by the amount of ultra-processed foods that they eat on a regular basis, and they're not home cooking, and they're buying pre-made, full of chemicals, lacking in fiber, full of sweeteners, flavorings, etc. And I think the latest figures are that it's close to 70% of all calories eaten in the US are ultra processed, and I think the UK it's just under 60%, and I think Australia is somewhere between 50 and 60% as well. So they're pretty similar, and our kids in both countries are doing worse than the adults. So the kids are raised even more on these ultra processed foods, and levels of obesity in Australia and the UK are pretty similarly terrible, and still getting worse despite, but pseudo attempts by governments to do something about the crisis. None of them have had really the courage to do anything. So I think the story I tell for the UK should absolutely resonate in Australia, as less and less people are cooking. More people, especially in poor areas, are surrounded by food deserts. They've just got takeaway places and cheap junk food more and more available, and the gap between the pricing of junk food and real foods is getting sort of bigger, and prices are going up, as in Australia and in the UK. So making it harder and harder without government action.
It's almost as if they don't want you to eat healthy. They want you to be fat and unhealthy by giving you so much access to all the ultra processed food. It's kind of annoying.
Well, it's not even annoying. I mean, in the UK, it worked out that the price of this bad diet is, runs to about 70 billion pounds, over $100 billion. But that works out at about over $600 extra tax per person that we're paying for the healthcare needed for obesity and diabetes. And so if people said, oh, are you happy to pay an extra $600 a year, because of the way that we're feeding people, they would probably say, no, I'd rather you put that money into subsidizing real foods and stop subsidizing junk foods and cheap meats, etc., which unfortunately the agricultural policies are all designed to keep going, and it's kept going because of this massive lobbying power of the food companies. Most of our food is controlled by about a dozen companies globally, and they have the same clout as medium-sized countries when it comes to advertising, political pressure. They can kill any bill that comes through, because they have most of these politicians in their pocket, and they also sponsor a lot of research in nutrition departments, and a very pervasive group that don't want to have change because they're making lots of money, and they're making these foods that are very tasty. People buy them voluntarily. I'm not saying they're forcing on people, but inherently they are making us all sicker and making us overeat.
Do you ever foresee, like in the future, that side changing in a dramatic way and getting better for us?
I think there will be some countries, hopefully, that are progressive, that will introduce taxes on these foods that are making the population unhealthy, just like we've done with cigarettes and with alcohol.
Yeah.
A lot of the arguments against junk food are, you can't. So, you probably remember we've had a succession of prime ministers recently, but we've caught up with Australia recently or Italy. So we had 3 in a short space of time. But Boris Johnson's, famously said, "Oh well, we don't. Why would we want to? People should be free to buy what they want. If there's 2-for-1 offers, we don't want to restrict what people get. That's the nanny state. And yet we don't have 2-for-1 offers on alcohol." You don't have, discounted cigarettes that you can get for nothing. They're massively taxed to disincentivize people to do them, and that works. And so I think we'll look back at this time and say, how come we were, not only allowing this to happen, but subsidizing these companies to produce foods that we now know are make us, regardless of the calories, make us overeat, and are distorting our whole food system and getting more and more prevalent, and sort of hooking kids on this idea that you don't have to cook. Everything, everything in life comes in a packet. You don't even have to buy a kitchen now that has a cooker. You just need a microwave. So, you have what they call Chef Mike, does all the work for you. So I think we'll look back at it and say this is just like the 1970s with smoking, when the companies were doing all they could to confuse the issue and say, well, there's nothing wrong with junk food. It's all about, nothing wrong with cigarettes. You just got to find the milder one, the one with slightly less tobacco in it. And that's what they're doing. They're saying, this is low fat, this is low calorie, there's no added sugar. That's just exactly the tactics that the cigarette companies were using in order to keep that market going and give false labels of healthiness on them. And I think we'll look back at this time and just say, what the hell were we doing? Creating this massive overeating spree of really bad food that's not only bad for us, but it is terrible for the planet, because most of these ultra-processed foods contain really cheap meats, and those meats are grown. 80% of our land is to grow crops to feed animals that then disappears into this sort of junk food that you don't even know you're eating meat most of the time, and it could easily be substituted. So terrible for the planet, terrible for us, and very misleading, because the fact that we're eating so much of this food means that those companies are controlling the agenda of how we see of food, and that has led to this idea that we think of food as calories, as fats, and as sugars, because those three things they can manipulate, and they can change the labels on the packet to say, oh, we've reformulated this. This has less calories, less fat, less sugar. It's still equally as bad for you, but by continuing with this mindset and the fact that, all of these things are doable. You just avoid fats and, okay, a bit of calories, but you can run it off, and all the big soda companies have sponsored enormous studies about exercise and weight loss and said, oh, kids, you can have a vending machine in the playground because, Coke is sponsoring that playground, or giving the idea that as long as you exercise, you can drink as much or eat as much junk food as you want. And that's absolute rubbish. As I've been saying recently, it's not a surprise to me or scientists in the obesity world, but the general public still believe that exercise is a good way for most people to lose weight, and it absolutely is proven not to be. You can't, outrun a bad diet, and I think that's really important. And so you can see how it also starts to fit together into this idea that we're stuck in this time warp with 100-year-old concept of calories, simplistic idea of reductionism that all Australians need to do is, get off their bums and go and exercise, and you think, well, that's actually nonsense. Someone needs to help them learn how to cook, know what real food is, look at quality of food. And that's the thing that's going to change. And, and importantly, get people to understand more this whole idea of the gut microbiome, which most of the big food companies are working on, but they won't tell anyone about it, because what they don't want is their products being tested on the gut microbiome, because then, they might have to have warnings or other things in there. So I think you've got to step back a bit and say, why are we in this position? And why are we not doing anything? And you can start to understand why it is. And it's going to take a brave government to break this. And it's also, most governments, like in Australia, short term. These things are long term. It needs really also a change in our mindset to say, well, if we're interested in preventive health, we've got to take at least 10 or 20 year ideas on this. You can't just do it in 3 years. Nothing will change. You'll just piss off a lot of people.
Ain't that the truth? You mentioned quite a few areas that I did want to touch on in further detail. One of them, like you say, you can't outrun a bad diet, and they say that abs are made in the kitchen. A firm believer of that. And I did want to ask you, so for those people that are wondering and saying, okay, Tim, well, I've been eating highly processed food my entire life. I feel fine. I have a six-pack. I'm healthy. I'm exercising every single day. So what is the harm, or what is the bad elements to high ultra processed foods? Like for those people that are saying a calorie is a calorie, like, are we able to break it down a little bit more and say, what are the harms that come as a result of eating ultra processed foods?
Absolutely. And we've all eaten ultra processed foods, and I was brought up on, ultra processed foods, as probably you were,
meat pies. Perfect example.
The Aussie meat pie, there are a few good ones, but most of them are not. And the school tuck shop wasn't the best place to get your nutrition. But we survived, And so, yeah, I'm not saying they are deadly and they're going to give you, you won't survive and you get cancer. So, and also for everything I'm saying, there are always anecdotal exceptions. People say, I did this and I'm fine. I'm trained in epidemiology, which is studying huge populations to work out on average how do people do.
Yeah.
And if I say, for example, that exercise doesn't help weight loss, what I mean is when you look at the many studies that have been done where they randomize people to a personal trainer or whatever and see what happens to them, on average, as many people gain weight as lose weight over time. And if there is a difference, it's a tiny difference of, a kilo or something, with a lot of effort. And increasingly with time, it gets harder and harder to lose weight as your body adapts. Doesn't mean there aren't exceptions. Doesn't mean that 5% of people can't lose weight. It may suit them, but for as many people there's actually ones that gain weight. That's what people have to understand. So they can always put their hand up and say, well, they didn't, for me, that was fine. As we can probably discuss, I really believe in the fact we are all individuals, and we can't follow single guidelines. And so you do need to experiment, but you shouldn't be expecting to lose weight if you exercise. You're going to be very lucky if you do. That's not to say I don't approve of exercise. Exercise is fantastic for health and your mental state and longevity, etc. But this is all about weight loss advice. So coming back to the question, why would ultra processed foods be bad for us? And we've all had them. They're very hard to avoid. I think there are a number of reasons, and if we break it down into the constituents of ultra processed foods, are generally extremely low in fiber. So it's difficult to make ultra processed foods that have these fibers in it that also allow you to get those tastes and those chemicals in them and give it longevity so it can stay forever in the shops. And so very little fiber means very little it gets to your gut microbes, which means that food is very rapidly absorbed from your gut. So you get very refined products. So it's like the difference between eating a corn on the cob and cornflakes or tortilla chips. The corn on the cob is the whole food, and it has really a lot of fiber in it, hard to digest fibers, which means that a lot of that food is protected until it gets right down to your lower colon, and then the gut microbes have a go at it, and they can start breaking down that fiber and use it. Whereas in processed food, they take the corn, they take that outer bit off. They only use the inside bits, which tend to be the sugary, starchy bits, and they will make them even finer. They will heat them up, destroy all the structure, so that as soon as you eat it, it gets passed into your gut, gets straight into your blood, and will give you a big sugar spike. Mm-hmm. And we now realize that the speed of which it goes into your system does have an effect on the rest of your body. So you can have exactly the same calorie meal in a different structure. So you can have as many calories in your corn, your cob, or your cornflakes, or your tortilla chips, and it would have a very different effect on the body. So the ultra processed food gives you a sugar spike after about 30 minutes. In some people, not everyone, in some people that is really big and can also have a dip after it, so-called glucose sugar dip. And we've shown with our big studies with Zoe, now in 50,000 people, that people who have these big spikes, either in sugar or in fat, which happens about 6 hours later, same principle. Fat gets released early on and hangs around a long time, both cause inflammation. And inflammation is like irritation, stress to the body, so that it's like a little mini fire that's just burning there. We all need inflammation to get rid of infection things, but normally it goes away and the fire's out. This leaves us sort of so simmering embers if you're having lots of these sugar and fat peaks. Whereas the whole food, you don't get that. And so the effects on the body are that it's being stressed much more, long level inflammation, that alters your metabolism, which is your sort of energy management system, and it becomes a bit deranged, more likely to put on weight, more likely to get diabetes, more likely to get a number of these Western chronic diseases long term, not just by eating one meal, but over time. And we also know that these sugar peaks and dips increase appetite as well. So that people who have them are going to overeat in the next 24 hours by about 300 calories, so around 10% overeating compared to people eating the same calorie foods in a whole form. So that's one mechanism. The other is that if you look on the back of a pack of, whether it's your tortilla chips or your cornflakes, you'll see lots of ingredients.
Yep.
And these are extra chemicals that are added to give it flavor, to give it color, to glue these bits together. Because, again, remember, they're extracts of food combined. They're not whole foods combined. They're deconstructed foods. So you've got to stick them together, recreate nature. And to do that, you need glues, you need sweeteners, you need colorants, flavorings, and all kinds of other magic that these really brilliant scientists do there to make them look good and have the right mouthfeel and make them tasty. And these chemicals have an effect on your gut microbes. So you think about, moving down further now your gut microbes are, they're being deprived of fiber. So they're saying, hang on, what's going on? My brain's saying I'm getting all this food, but we're not seeing anything down here. So we think that upsets things a bit and might send signals about being hungry more than if they were being satisfied, because basically your microbes are chemical factories that are always sending chemical signals around the body. And some people believe they are responsible for telling your brain when you're full. So some signal should get there after about 20 minutes of eating, which you don't tend to get with fast junk food. So they're not getting fiber. They're pretty pissed off. By not having fiber, they shrink down the number of species, and you get a pro-inflammatory type of community that is expecting the odd bit of fat to drop down from your fried chicken or your processed meats, and the ones eating plants disappear because they've got nothing to eat. And you're also getting the effect of these other chemicals on them that makes them react badly. So we know that we haven't studied most of them, but we do know that emulsifiers, which are the common glues that stick processed foods together, they have an effect on not everybody, but many people. Their microbes react to them and then produce abnormal chemicals, which, in mice can lead to diabetes, etc. Mm-hmm. And artificial sweeteners also, not only do some of them actually cause a little sugar spike. So we know that sucralose and saccharin in some people, myself included, cause a little sugar spike, and they're supposed to be inert, right? So that they're sending some signal to the brain. But even if they didn't, they all, when you test people, they affect the gut microbes. So we don't know exactly what they're doing, but you get a distorted picture in your gut microbes if you're having artificial sweeteners. And mouse models have suggested that leads to greater propensity to obesity as well. So you can see you've got this picture of all these chemicals having damaged the microbes, lack of fiber, plus, for reasons we don't fully understand, signals telling you to overeat. And you put that all together, it's not a good picture that you really want 60% of your food and 75% of kids' food to be doing to them. And once you start thinking about it, it does explain why, our calorie intakes haven't increased massively over the last 40 years, and yet every year we're all getting fatter. And it's probably because, we are eating more of this stuff and less of the good stuff.
You talked about slowing down the metabolism, which was something that I did want to make mention of and ask you more about. Like, everyone's metabolism is a little bit different, but if you constantly eating ultra processed food, you're saying that basically it slows down your metabolism, makes it a bit more sluggish. I found that interesting. And also, I don't know if you've seen any of these videos, but I think it's Food Insider. They did a video of, they recreated a McDonald's Big Mac, and same with KFC chicken, basically with all the listed ingredients in America. And my goodness, I was scared half to death because the amount of chemicals that they had in order to make that. They basically recreated the Big Mac and KFC's chicken, and they had a huge table full of all these chemicals, and they put it all, they're like pouring it inside. It's like a science lab. And I was shocked. I'm like, people are actually putting this stuff in their bodies, and your body, you're making it like your body has to digest all that rubbish. I mean, for goodness sake, like, that turned me off. And I went cold turkey from fast food and all that sort of stuff when I was a teenager, but that just completely turned me off altogether from all these other highly processed rubbish. And whenever I go into the store now, I'll look at the ingredients. So I'll make sure I'm eating more whole foods and proper stuff. I mean, I do have my weaknesses from time to time, as everybody does, but yeah, I just found it fascinating how all these chemicals really do upset you so much.
And yet we know so little about them. And I think, just to be clear, we know very little about the mechanisms here. I'm speculating about metabolism changing, but there's only one or two studies in this, and the first randomized controlled trial on this was only 3 years ago. And so you think, what a brilliant job the food industry's done to avoid anybody doing proper studies or trials on the concept of ultra processed food versus whole food. I mean, you've got to hand it to these guys. They've done a fantastic job, and they get the very best nutrition scientists to work for them. And they create these incredible tasting things out of these chemical ingredients that you couldn't imagine, as you were shocked when you see. And none of these chemicals have been properly tested on the gut microbiome. And, they've done a brilliant job in making sure that, that's not going to happen anytime soon by this lobbying. And our food safety laws are still, based, in the 1950s about, you've just got to feed a lot of it to rats and see if they get liver cancer. That's sort of still the concept today. And it, and they can get away with getting all these regulations passed because no government wants to stop progress about, food manufacturing and industry and getting cheaper product out there. So there's very little control, and we don't understand really what these chemicals do. And that's why having the gut microbiome and seeing it, these community of microbes that is these chemical factories is like a new organ in the body. It's like we've discovered a new liver, and therefore we should be using that to test foods. And, we should only be passing foods that don't adversely affect our gut microbes, treating it as if it was a liver and it was going to give us liver cancer because, these are foods that we're going to be exposed to for years. It's not like it's a single meal or you're taking a tablet for a week. This is a lifetime often of these chemicals that just haven't been studied. So, I think people often say, oh, well, I'm alarmist. And, as you said, we've survived. But there could be we're assuming everyone reacts the same way, and we know that's not true. So the emulsifier story is really interesting. And 1 in 4 people have a really bad reaction to some of these emulsifiers in their gut microbes. Others don't. That's why these things are hard to pick up. And in the future, I can see a time where we will have warning, this contains this sweetener, warning, this contains this emulsifier, and people will be tested to say, well, I can't have that. In the same way, we're demonizing gluten and lectin and all these other sort of fads that come and go. And yet every day we're exposed to this other stuff that may well be the real culprit.
I mean, they have for packets of like lollies and things like that here, they have no artificial colors or flavors, but then they'll have the emulsifiers. And I know for myself, I've got a very sensitive gut. And I know that if I have anything with soy lecithin in it and emulsifiers or any colors, I get really, really bad bloat, and it hurts like hell. It's not long after, honestly. Like, that's why I try and stay away from it as much as possible. And they even put it in bread these days. Like you go down to the local grocer and you have a look at a packet of white bread, you look at the ingredients in it and it shocks you. It's like, for bread. But they're doing almost everything.
People don't realize quite how, ubiquitous these chemicals are now. And by stealth, it's just crept into our whole system. And until I was researching Food for Life, which is a sort of more a practical guide, A to Z of foods, I had no idea, like you, about, what had happened to breads. And it's only when you go and look and you start looking at 20 different types, I thought ciabatta was an ancient, Italian peasant bread that was fantastic to eat. And of course, it was created by food scientists in the 1980s. It's not an old Italian food at all. And was the best-selling healthy sliced breads in the UK that have a brown and look wholesome and everything. When you look at the ingredients, they're terrible. And, but they have a long shelf life and they don't go moldy because they've got these preservatives in them. And so, people need to be much more attentive. And for me, I know that, most breads now were the cause of me, I probably gaining, a kilo a year, in my 50s. Because I love bread, but then I was having too many healthy sandwiches. And that was terrible for me. So there's only a few breads that I can eat that, I make my own now. Generally, if you make your own, you know what's in it at least, or you go to a few trusted bakers. But some of these staples, which, we assume are healthy, I think everyone does need to be much more critical about what they're eating and, try and break this trend of just accepting things as health food because they've got healthy looking labels. And I think that's the real frightening thing here, what people can put in food quite legally, in Australia and the UK.
What worries me so much, like they get away with quite a bit and people are none the wiser. And these days, a lot of people are wisening up, I should say, which is great to hear. But then also there's a lot of people that aren't, and a lot of people that just don't care. So I think if we took our health really, really seriously, then maybe we might actually care a little bit more with what we put in our body and how it actually makes us feel and how it attributes to the overall health aspect of us.
Well, that's in a way, the reason I write these books and do these sort of talks is to try and empower people to do stuff themselves. And I think we've got to move from this era that we relied on other people to look after us. We relied on them, our doctors or, people in public health to advise us. And I think that system is now broken. Yeah. Medics in Australia, just like in the UK and the US, get virtually no nutrition training. They're not the people that do it. I'm medically trained. I thought if bread was brown and had a healthy label on it, it was going to be good for me. why wouldn't I recommend brown bread above white bread? But, I didn't know they just diet or, and you need to look at the fiber content versus the carb content. I had no clue. So, I made lots of mistakes before I really got into nutrition. Although, people would say, well, you're a doctor, you should be an expert. I was giving people advice on diet for their bone health and telling them to eat, drink lots of milk, and, all turns out to be wrong. But, so I think everyone really, if they, the most important thing they can do for their health is to make the right food choices.
Yeah.
And it's also the most important thing you can do for the planet. We haven't talked about that, but, I do go, when I wrote the book, it was about the only book I could find where you can discuss food at a level of health. How good is it for your health, for your gut microbes, and for the planet? And obviously the sweet spot is if you get all three of those right. And generally they tend to go together. Generally, what's good for your gut and your health is good for the planet. And I think that's a really important message. So I think you're absolutely, I'm agreeing with you that, the information is there. There's a lot of confusing stuff. That if you accept this holistic view, and, the advice is still evolving as well, it is an exciting time to empower people to really experiment themselves, work out what works for them. And, and in a way, that's another reason that I'm championing also this personalized nutrition approach, because there isn't one rule for everybody. I think, yes, looking after your gut gets you a certain way. And I think it really helps a mentality to think, is what I'm eating good for my gut microbes? That's a pretty good test of food. And I think, there's not much you can go wrong there. It's diversity of plants, it's fermented foods, it's brightly colored, it's, fasting, it's avoiding ultra processed food. But then this other level of personalization, as I was saying, bread for me is very bad, but for my wife, it's not a real problem. It was really annoying. She eats croissants and things, and doesn't get a sugar spike. Really annoying. So but I've switched my food to a fatty diet. And that's what people need to start thinking about is how do I make these shifts? Do I really need breakfast? Should I be, am I an evening person, a morning person? How much fermented food can I eat? Are there certain things that affect me, certain chemicals I really have to avoid? I think this idea of experimentation is important when you grasp it once you realize that everything you've been told is probably rubbish. And you have to go back to basics to say, how do I sort of relearn this stuff? How do I listen to my body again? And I think that's really important. We start to go back to basics, think about, am I hungry now? Most people, when they wake up in the morning, 7 a.m, you're not starving. So why do we eat? Because Mr. Kellogg's tell us to eat. Hunter-gatherers don't eat in the morning, don't have a word for breakfast. So where did that come from? So, and yet I say this, and I think 10% of the population are hungry in the morning.
Yeah.
And they say, Tim, you can't deprive us of our breakfast. I'm really hungry. If I don't have that, I'm really, my day's terrible. So fine, go for it. But don't let someone tell you that, you're a bad parent if your children don't have breakfast. If a teenager says, I'm not hungry, don't stop forcing me. Just let them find out what works for them. Yeah.
Yeah. I've interviewed a lot of scientists and doctors regarding diets, different diet solutions for a lot of people. There's so many out there. It's just hard to keep up with all of them. I think there's like a new one almost every single week, it seems like these days. And one of the things I love about Zoe and Zoe's approach, and even your approach, is suiting a person's diet to their needs. And I have what I call the freedom diet, which is kind of a similar philosophy. to that, but also being mindful of what I'm actually putting in my body. So eating more whole foods, trying to have more fiber in my diet, although too much fiber for me kind of backs me up and I don't like it. So I've got to be wary of that. I can have bread, but the kind of bread that I get from a trusted baker who pretty much his whole process is nice sourdough, and he sources it, all his ingredients from good quality produce. So it's good, and it takes him 48 something hours to make the stuff, which is just great. It goes through that whole process of the proteins breaking down, and I don't want to get all sciencey because I don't fully understand it properly. All I know is it works for me, and you probably understand it more than I do, Tim. But yeah, I think I did want to ask you about this point because you've written 3 books. You've got you're the co-founder of Zoe, which is, you can talk a little bit more about that with this answer if you like. But so you got these 3 books: The Diet Myth, Spoon Fed, and Food for Life. How do we go about trusting this science, even the old science versus the new science, if it is constantly evolving, if it's constantly changing?
Well, I think never believe a scientist who says, they've got the answer forever. I think, or I think we have to move away from reductionism. If you meet a scientist and says, the answer is this molecule, all you got to do in life is avoid this, or all you got to do is take this supplement and all your problems are gone. I think we've got to embrace the fact that nutrition is incredibly complex. Our bodies are incredibly complex. We're incredibly complex machines. And a lot of people are trying to make us think we're really simple and that there's a simple solution and this is where marketing comes in and whatever. But if we, realize that, it is complicated, and we need to start embracing technology to understand it, and, not trust anyone who thinks it's that simple. I think that would be my take home here. It's like, all these foods, what do we associate? Oranges, vitamin C, carrots, vitamin A, coffee, caffeine. It turns out all have got 1,000 chemicals in them. And, we've been obsessed with that little one and forgot everything else. And that's a real danger. So I think it is an exciting time. There are some general principles. And I think, if you eat for your gut microbes and you start thinking that way, as a general rule, if some of this advice doesn't fit in with that, then you should ignore it. And the rest of it, I think it's a bit of trial and error and personalization, and not taking fads, and also not doing things that you can't sustain for the rest of your life. So don't do anything too extreme. I'm going to give up, everything forever. It makes it socially very difficult, or you're going to, when you fail, you'll get depressed and kick off. So I think it's about lots of little nudges in that right direction. So it's very hard to give up ultra processed foods completely. If someone offers me a bowl of crisps, I'm a sucker for it. I'm going to, go for it. Don't beat yourself up. Don't say, oh no, I belong to that religion that says, I can never eat a crisp. You should have faith that if the rest of the time you're feeding your gut microbes well, they will allow you that flexibility to, occasionally come off the wagon and have a bit too much to drink, have a late night kebab, all the things that happen to humans over years without beating yourself up about it. So I think it's changing that philosophy from I must stick to this, I must do this, I must follow this fad, to something that you just say, this is a long-term change for me and my family. It's a sort of philosophy rather than absolute rules. And I think that's the way we're going to progress. And there will be scientific changes, but we have to keep up with them, but beware of everyone saying they've got a single solution in a single tablet or a single chemical. And I think that's the way forward. Embrace the complexity, embrace our individuality, and, embrace experimentation.
Do you believe in some foods that contribute to the aging process and longevity? Do you believe that they have any properties like that in benefiting?
Yeah, all good foods, probably. I mean, I think, again, it's, people will sell you, this is the longevity berry, or, if it comes from the Amazon, and, you just got to, or you get this amazing spirulina that grows in this, high altitude lake in Peru. And basically the most theories of aging include 4 or 5 elements out of the 10 that involve diet. And suppressing inflammation is probably the number one part of it. So things that reduce the inflammatory, the stress on the body and on the microbes are going to be beneficial aging. And that's all the things I've talked about. So it's reducing your sugar spikes, reducing your fat spikes, improving your gut microbes, and things like fasting intervals, giving your gut a good break, and lots of good evidence now that time restricted eating, where instead of the food manufacturers telling us we have to eat all the time and eat this healthy low calorie protein snack before you go to bed to build up your muscle, all that's nonsense. Just do what our ancestors did, and when the sun went down, the fire went out, then that's when you stop eating, and until 14 hours later. And I think all these things have incremental effects to prevent aging, and all these systems are linked. And increasingly, we're seeing the links between the gut, the immune system, and aging. And our immune system is actually key to repairing aging cells, getting rid of damage, cleaning up at night. So really important to get your gut microbes really talking to your immune cells properly with the biggest tools, which means get as many of them as you can, producing as many chemicals, which means you've got to feed them right, feed them diversely. And so I think all these principles are applying to aging. I don't think it's a separate area. That's what I'm trying to say. I think it's all linked to essentially gut health, which is what Ayurvedic medicine's been on about. Chinese medicine have always seen the gut actually at the center of this, and that's why long-lived populations all have good gut-friendly diets.
I saw a video the other day actually of this. I think she was 98 years old or something like that, and she had the sweet old lady had this jar of ice cream that she was holding, and the woman that was interviewing her asked her, "So what do you think is the secret to your old age?" And she goes, "I enjoy life by cheating once in a while. I eat all the sugary things when I want to eat the sugary things. I have fun with my life." And I think it's like it's setting the point of it's eating all this stuff every once in a while. It's not going to kill you, but eating it on a frequent basis is going to really do damage to your microbiome. I know you have genetics. You've studied genetics in twins, which I think is another fascinating topic, which we could go into, but for the sake of time, I don't think we can, perhaps for another conversation. But I wanted to sort of tie this conversation up in a nice sort of bow by asking you about, do you think you've got another diet book in you, or have you sort of finished with diet books for the time being?
No, I think we'll probably scratch the surface. I mean, I wouldn't write another one like this. It was 6 years of my life, and I realized halfway through it why no one else had done it, because it's really tough, because, a sort of A to Z of food, is sort of impossible for any one person to do. So it was far too much work. But I think, I think the science is evolving. I think there's so much exciting stuff on the future of food as well, future fermenting, but also, these meat replacements. We've seen version 1s at the moment, but, the V2s are looking incredible. Everything we've spoken up to now is pretty depressing, right? But I think, to help our planet and to help our guts, there is this new food tech revolution out there that people need to know about. And I think, I've got a chapter about it in Food for Life, but that, it's only just starting. And I think within 2 years, we could see price parity between, a burger patty in the US made in a lab and one that's made by, killing cows. And we could also see fermented plants that people can't distinguish from processed meats, replacing those meats at equivalent price points, which would be incredible, and that would really change the whole farming system and the way we're abusing our planet. So I think there are some really exciting areas like that, and we've just touched on the personalization, but at Zoe, we've sort of got version 1 out there in the US and the UK, which tells people about their sugar spikes, their fat spikes, and their gut microbiome. But we haven't really got into detail about best time of people to eat, morning people, evening people, identifying who a dipper is and saying, you've got a particular problem, identifying which people should avoid emulsifiers, as you talked about, which sweeteners people should avoid because we know they're going to give them problems. Working out things like hunger scores and things for which foods leave you hungry. We used to have this joke about the Chinese meal, didn't they? That the sort of as soon as you've eaten it, you feel hungry again. But there might be lots of different foods that affect people very differently, and so some people feel full for much longer, and that can be very personalized as well. So I think the nice thing is we've got through the Zoe commercial product in the US and the UK, we've got now 75,000 people who've not only doing the test, but we've got their gut microbe data, we've got all their nutrition data, they're getting retested. This is all going to just be amazing science data. So yeah, I think we just scraped the surface. It's a very, very exciting time. And I think we can do a much better job than we're doing now on many areas that are still gray areas in nutrition. Yeah. Some people can maybe eat meat, others, eat healthily, others can't. There might be some medicines that your gut microbes interfere with. We know, we haven't talked about antidepressants, but there's, they may not work in some people because of your gut microbes. And so trying to link medicines and microbes and, once you start to see medicines as chemicals and food as chemicals, it's all the same to your microbes. They don't care. And so I think, there's so much more we can do, but I'll pick a shorter book next time. That's what I'll do.
You wouldn't be cautious at all with any of the foods being made with modern technology? You wouldn't be cautious in their ability to be sort of processed at all or actually good quality?
Oh, absolutely. No, I definitely am. Yeah. But I think the new companies that are starting have to be more transparent about what they're doing because, people don't care what happens when you kill a cow and you just send to a factory, and it goes, that final beef lasagna ends up going, as happened in Europe, this scandal ended up with horse meat in it. No one actually chased it all the way through 5 countries. But if you've got starting something like a stem cell meat business, you're going to be under huge scrutiny about what you put in it. But the nice thing is you can add exactly what you want to put in. You can actually put healthy things into the lab mix to grow it up. But I think you do have to be very careful, not make the same mistakes we did again. But I've seen lots of prototypes that are pretty pure. They're not adding stuff at all that you wouldn't want in your body, that taste the same as, ultra processed meat products. And so I think it is all moving in the right direction. But we got to be careful, and we've got to scrutinize them. And definitely some of the meat alternatives on the market now are not necessarily better for you, but they might be better for the planet because we're not having to feed all these poor animals, to slaughter them and make an equivalent. So, but that's version 1. I see them all changing. I think people will in the future be buying those ones when there's a much cleaner alternative it doesn't have all those chemicals in them.
Yeah. Finishing this conversation off, I want to bring awareness to the co-founding of your company, Zoe. Would you be able to explain more in depth a little bit for people what Zoe is, what it does, and how they can get a part of it if they want to?
Yes. So 6 years ago, I was giving a book talk, and 2 guys came up to me who are entrepreneurs who've been working on the internet business in artificial intelligence, and said, we'd like to form a company. And I said, I'm not interested unless we do some real science first to establish what's going on, because we were talking about personalized nutrition and the microbiome. And amazingly, they came back 3 weeks later and they said, yeah, we've got seed money, let's do it. And so we ended up doing the world's largest intervention study, giving 1,000 people identical meals and seeing what happened to their metabolism after that. And it turned out there were 10 to 20-fold differences in how people responded to those foods, which allowed us to then build an algorithm that could predict how anyone could then respond to any food. So that's how I found out that, bread was really bad for me and I should switch to a more fatty diet to reduce my sugar spikes. And I also found out my gut microbes were pretty healthy, which is the one thing perhaps keeping me alive. And that was the basic concept, when that became a home kit, and where people got a glucose monitor, which you wear for 2 weeks. It gives you a readout onto your phone in real time what's happening to your blood sugar, which is really cool, because you can, for the first time, see, the effects of those cornflakes, your beer, your Ginster's pie, whatever it is, and realize things have an effect. You do a blood test, which is measure your fat 6 hours after a fatty meal, which we correlate with, everyone else. And you get your microbes, which you send off your poo in the post, basically. And that's highly definite defined sequencing using the best genetic techniques. So we can identify thousands of strains and species in your stool and categorize it. You get all that stuff back, and you get an algorithm on your phone which tells you how you would score every food from a score of 0 to 100, and then allows you to put meals together that give you an average score. So you can say, I want to have scores that are good for me and my gut microbes. I want to be scoring over 70 on average meal. And we encourage people to have lots of diversity and lots of different plants, all the sort of general ideas I've been talking about. We encourage fasting overnight. We encourage trying new things, though, and nothing's off the menu. So we never say you can't have this, and we never talk about calories. And I think it's not a diet. This is a new way of thinking about food with a tool that gets you around that complexity that allows you to do it. So that's what it is. It's only available at the moment in the US and the UK. So far, most people who do it, and it's a 3-month, usually a 3-month program after you've got your results, and we have a virtual nutritionist helping you create your scores, etc. Virtually everyone finds they're less hungry and they have more energy. A few people lose weight, but it's not a dramatic weight loss product. We're not intending it to do that because we don't want to rebound. Yeah. We want this to be a very gradual thing. So it's more about healing yourself from the inside out, thinking about food in a different way, improving your mood, all this other stuff, and generally moving to a healthier planet and health. And so it's going super well. We had amazing interest in the UK, and we had to scale up massively. And, we're selling about 2,000 kits a week or something in the UK, and there's still a big waiting list. We'd like to take to other countries, and Australia's definitely on our list of places to go. We're still sorting out the scaling and other things, and keep tweaking the product. It's always changing, but we love to come to Australia to promote it. But at the moment, you've got to do this on a trip to the US or the UK if you want to get it at the moment.
I mean, I stopped counting calories a long time ago, and I'm glad that I did. It's not as worrying anymore.
No, I think a lot of what we're doing is educational. So not everyone can afford these kits. They cost about £250, but that is a fraction of what you would pay if you went to a doctor to try and get this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But what we want to also do is people can go to the website. In Australia, there's lots of information about our science on the website. That's joinzoe.com. We've written about 40 papers, a lot of them on nutrition, as well as we did a lot on COVID at the time as well. And we have a free podcast also called Zoe Science and Nutrition, which covers these areas in much more detail if really interested in that nutrition thing. So we're really keen on spreading the word and, changing the health of millions, and do it both with this commercial kit, but also through media like this that are free to everybody, because I think, these ideas should be spread regardless of whether, you do these individual tests or not. It's about listening to your body and changing the way you think about food.
Well, I, for one, am glad to be helping spreading this kind of message, because I think more and more people need to get on it, need to understand it more. And Professor Tim Spector, thank you so much for your time, your energy, all the things you're doing out there in the world. People can go and find you, your books. You're not that hard to find at all. Just search you up everywhere pretty much, and Zoe as well, of course, if you are in the UK and the US. But Dr. Tim Spector, thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, your advice and your stories, and for joining me on the Storybox podcast.
Been my pleasure. Hope to see you in real life soon.